So, A Different Man is a different type of film that feels like it has some commentary to lob at the what's the best way, like kind of like the drama that evokes a lot of emotion from like disabilities and disorders, and kind of like turns it on its head a little bit. It's a very it's a very tricky film at times. Like you think you have it figured out at certain points, and then there's something else that comes in and just keeps changing it and making it so much more interesting and fascinating. With kind of like almost like kind of like a quiet satire that goes on with it within it, even though there's a lot happening. So the film is all about this struggling actor called Edward, played by Sebastian Stan, who has the condition known as neurofibromatosis. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's basically a condition where you have like a bunch of like benign tumors and loose skin on your face, so that your face basically looks like much bigger and lumpier, like it has a lot more skin on it. Which very much is a real condition here. But of course, Sebastian Stan, because he's playing his character, he has like the makeup and the prosthetics on to make him look like he has this condition. And he's struggling. He's struggling to find work that isn't just trying to like showcase his condition. Like all he can find is like acting in infomercials in which they want that condition. He tries to connect with his next door neighbor Ingrid, played by Renata Rainsfjord. And like, yeah, like she's clearly into him, but he's, very nervous and not sure that, he can make a romance like this work. Almost like a little bit of a Beauty and the Beast type thing going on here. And hang on to that, like put a pin in that. I'll come back to that in a moment. But Edward is just basically not comfortable with himself, where he feels the need to like speak up, when he's hurt, or report like the like a leak that's coming from his upstairs neighbors in his apartment. So he just doesn't have the confidence. So when like his doctors say that, hey, we have this surgery that we can do, which can remove all that excess skin, and make you look, like you have like a typical face, without, the typical condition of neurofibromatosis. So like, of course, Edward jumps at this chance, and eventually his skin starts peeling off, almost kind of like I thought it was going to go into like body horror territory, which it kind of does, the way that it peels that off. And then of course, under all that, he's Sebastian Stan. So within the blink of an eye, like his life changes immediately. And instead of, being in like an apartment where the roof is leaky and struggling for work, now he's like a real estate agent who works in who has a very upscale apartment. And life seems to have turned around for him. And he's tried to like turn around everything about himself. Like he's not even taken the name Edward anymore. Like he's changed it entirely. So having changed everything about himself, he's hoping that, maybe Ingrid would accept him now that he doesn't have this condition, so playing up the, like the kind of like Beauty and the Beast angle, like, like I was a beast, and then, like the curse was lifted, and now I look beautiful like this. But what's fascinating about what this film does is that, that cure, that, like the typical ending of like Beauty and the Beast, that happens halfway through. And the film kind of answers this question of like, okay, well, what would happen after that? Like, because I'm sure like a lot of people watch Beauty and the Beast, they're kind of like, oh, I kind of found him more attractive as the Beast. I don't know why he had to become a man. Like, what's life going to be like for him after that? What happens, can he get used to like being in this new form where he's more attractive now? Or is it just going to eat away at him? And it more or less kind of does. Like he tries to get back into the good graces of Ingrid, but not by being himself. He doesn't tell him that he was the same person with the condition that she originally fell in love with. Which is unfortunate, because she has written a screenplay all about falling in love with for someone with this condition. So even though Sebastian Stan's character gets cast in this, he has to end up wearing prosthetics, and it feels like he's playing up the same role as before, except now it doesn't feel as genuine. It doesn't feel like he's being himself, and he's denying him this identity for himself. But he probably figures like, no matter, I could still get in the good graces with Ingrid. But then halfway through the film, everything changes with the arrival of Oswald, played by Adam Pearson, who is somebody who's a real life actor who does have neurofibromatosis. So once he comes onto to the scene, like, it changes everything. And I don't just mean that for Edward's life. I mean just for like the whole tone of the film. Because of the first half, you've basically been watching this an actor pretending to have this condition and then watching it like fade away. So now that we have Pearson's character come in, now we have like a direct comparison, almost as kind of like it's holding up a mirror saying like, how effective is this drama when someone with this condition is involved? And fittingly, Oswald, Adam Pearson's character, ends up being a consultant on this play. And much to Edward's chagrin, Oswald ends up being a real charmer. He's like everyone loves him. He's outgoing. You know, he offers very, very earnest but very, very gentle advice. Like, he doesn't want to step on Edward's toes here. He realizes, like, yeah, you know, you're an accomplished actor, and I know you're trying to do a bit. But I'm just going to give a little bit of insight here, and I'm going to offer, you know, a little bit of my intellect here, which he does have a lot of it, which impresses Ingrid pretty quick. And you can kind of see where this is going. Like Oswald is like slowly stealing away the life that Edward had denied himself. So he basically eats away at Edward with like this self-doubt, for having accepted such like an easy life and an easy exit, rather than live with this condition where, you know, if he had just been a little bit more outgoing, you know, he could have had the life of Oswald. And, you know, Oswald was just like a rising talent of an actor. He reads a lot. He performs karaoke. He knows a lot of people. He's just generally fun to be around. Like, they literally have beers with him a few times, and he just seems like the greatest guy to hang out with. So it's like this direct... It's almost like a very somewhat subtle, but also like very direct condemnation of how like we easily equate like, you know, beauty with like, you know, success and who people love and who they want to gravitate towards. And that kind of like myth that kind of like seemed to like have built up with Beauty and the Beast kind of shatters Edward's perceptions and his world, but to a degree where it's like he's doing it to himself. Like, Oswald doesn't want to make the world worse for Edward, but Oswald just kind of deserves a lot of like what he gets in this film. Like, he ends up taking over the role from Edward because he's more genuine in that type of role. He ends up, you know, seducing Ingrid more easily just because he's such a great guy. That, you know, Edward just beats himself up, and, you know, his life spirals more and more out of control, where, you know, he's just got to try to learn to, you know, to be more open and be more honest. Otherwise, it's going to eat him up inside. And it takes some very unorthodox routes. There are some clashes here and there. There's some there's some very like awkward moments between them. But there's always like that questioning of like, you know, how effective, you know, like what would a play like that say about disability, you know, when someone has like this condition and they bring it out there. And I feel like without even just being that like cynical or vicious, the film kind of like attacks that idea of like, you know, having like big name actors being in roles where they're meant to portray someone with a disability, and how they kind of like lay into a lot of the pity that gets associated with that. In addition to that, I think there's also a bit of a conversation to have about, you know, how you know, about like trying to remove that condition and trying to remove that part of your personality within that. So like I was kind of like relating a little bit of that to the autism cure movement, but it also kind of like plays a lot into Adam Pearson as a person. Like, he's been very much involved in campaigns to be against like bullying for people who look different from you. You know, he's he's a very active actor. Like, he's actually worked a lot before with this director Aaron Schimberg. And just he has such a natural presence. Like, and I've seen Pearson like in a few films. You might have seen him too. He's been in films like Under the Skin, which is a fascinating film. I actually absolutely loved it. And he's been like in a few smaller films here and there, and some that of course do play into his condition, but A Different Man, I think, is a film that kind of like plays into his condition in a very unique way, where it feels like it turns the camera, it kind of like turns the camera around on the audience, because like like we're so used to like seeing like other actors depict different disabilities and disorders and conditions on the screen, but then what happens when someone else who actually has this condition comes on the screen, and then what now we can compare them, and now we can kind of like question this topic on like a deeper level. I feel like the film, if I had like a negative criticism of the film, I think it would be that it gets a little bit lost in how it tries to search around for different angles within this narrative to explore different thematic thread lines, and I feel like some might get lost here and there, but I think it always keeps it interesting. Like there's definitely something building with how Oswald becomes more loved and Edward becomes just more riddled with like self-hatred. That it's a fascinating story in its own right, but just everything about the way it's framed, and I think the way that it reflects the world and how we look at like these kind of like disability, condition, and disorder dramas, it changes a lot, and it's such like a fascinatingly complex film in terms of like all the directions that it goes, that I'm honestly kind of curious to watch it like 2 or 3 more times just to see like where I fall and where I feel like are the strongest elements that are evoked from it. But I think like probably the simplest way to like, if you just like need like a very cut and dry way to kind of like approach this film, I would say like it's a pretty good satirization of Beauty and the Beast, considering that they bring that narrative up at several times and also critique it at the same time, which is very much what A Different Man is doing. So it's very much a fascinating film that does a good job, like not just like scrutinizing those types of dramas, but kind of, like I said, holding up a mirror to an audience who doesn't have that condition and forcing us to question it on a much deeper and more uncomfortable level, I think, as kind of like the film goes on. So yeah, this is a deeply fascinating film that I loved every single minute of. It's surreal weirdness and drama and comedy. It's such a wonderful little film.